The gymnasium smelled like old rubber and sweat. It was a smell that never really went away, no matter how many times they cleaned the floors or opened the windows. The lights above buzzed with that low electric hum that most people stopped noticing after a few minutes. But Maria Delgado noticed everything. She had trained herself to notice things. The way the ropes hung from the ceiling. The way the heavy bags swung just slightly even when nobody was hitting them because the air conditioning pushed them back and forth like tired ghosts. She noticed the cracks in the mirror on the far wall and the tape peeling off the edges of the boxing ring in the center of the room. Maria was 26 years old. She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall. She weighed 132 pounds. Her hair was black and she always tied it back so tight that it pulled at the skin near her temples. She had brown eyes that looked almost golden when the light hit them a certain way. Her hands were small, but her knuckles were rough and calloused from years of hitting things that were not meant to be hit by hands that small. She had walked into this gym for the first time when she was 14 years old. Back then, she was just a skinny girl from a neighborhood in East Los Angeles where people learned early that the world was not going to be gentle with them. Her mother worked 2 jobs cleaning houses for families who lived in neighborhoods that looked nothing like theirs. Her father had left when Maria was 6. He just walked out one morning and never came back. No letter, no phone call, nothing. Maria learned from that experience that people could disappear from your life without any warning, and that the only person you could truly count on was yourself. Growing up, she was small and quiet. In school, the other kids did not pay much attention to her. She was not popular. She was not unpopular. She was just there, like a piece of furniture that everyone walked past without really seeing. But Maria felt things deeply, even if she did not show it on the surface. She felt the frustration of watching her mother come home exhausted every night with barely enough money to pay the bills. She felt the anger of living in a world that seemed designed to keep people like her family down. And she felt a burning desire somewhere deep inside her chest that told her she was meant for something more than this. The gym was called Ramos Boxing. It was run by an old man named Carlos Ramos, who had been a professional boxer in the 1970s and 80s. He never made it to a world title fight, but he had fought some good fighters, and he had the scars and the crooked nose to prove it. Carlos was in his late 60s when Maria first walked through his door. He was sitting behind a small wooden desk reading a newspaper and eating a sandwich when this skinny 14-year-old girl stood in front of him and said she wanted to learn how to fight. Carlos looked at her over the top of his reading glasses. He chewed his sandwich slowly. He looked her up and down the way a mechanic might look at a car that someone was asking him to fix. Then he said something that Maria would never forget. He said, "You do not look like a fighter." Maria stared at him without blinking and said, "That is why I need to become one." Carlos smiled at that. He liked her answer. He told her that training was not free, but that if she was willing to help clean the gym every evening after the other fighters were done, he would teach her for no charge. Maria agreed immediately. That very same day, she started sweeping floors and wiping down equipment. And the next morning before school, she showed up at the gym at 5:30 in the morning ready to learn. The first few months were brutal. Carlos did not go easy on her because she was young or because she was a girl. He believed that the ring did not care about any of that, and so he should not care about it either. He made her skip rope until her calves burned so bad she thought they might actually catch fire. He made her do push-ups and sit-ups and burpees until she thought she was going to be sick. And sometimes she was sick. She would run to the bathroom and throw up, and then come back out and keep going. Carlos taught her the basics first. How to stand, how to keep her hands up, how to move her feet, how to breathe. Most people do not think about breathing when they think about fighting, but Carlos said breathing was the most important thing. If you cannot breathe, you cannot think. If you cannot think, you cannot fight. And if you cannot fight, you have already lost. Maria was a fast learner. She picked things up quickly. Her body was naturally quick and coordinated. She had good reflexes and even better instincts. Carlos noticed this early on, and it excited him because he had been training fighters for decades, and he knew talent when he saw it. Maria had something that could not be taught. She had a kind of internal engine that just kept running no matter how tired she got or how much pain she was in. Some people called it heart. Some people called it grit. Carlos just called it the thing that separates real fighters from everyone else. By the time Maria was 16, she was sparring with other fighters in the gym. Most of them were boys and young men, and most of them did not want to spar with a girl at first. They thought it was beneath them, or they were afraid of what people would say if a girl hit them, or, worst of all, if a girl beat them. But Carlos insisted, and so they did it. And one by one, Maria earned their respect, not because she beat all of them. She did not. Some of those boys were bigger and stronger and more experienced, but she never backed down. She never quit. She took punches that would have made grown men wobble, and she kept coming forward with her hands up and her eyes locked on whatever was in front of her. There was one moment during those early years that defined who Maria was going to become. She was sparring with a boy named Diego who was 18 and had been boxing for 4 years. Diego was good. He was fast and he had heavy hands, and he did not hold back just because Maria was younger and smaller. About 2 minutes into the round, Diego caught Maria with a hard right hand right on the chin. Her legs went wobbly, and for a second the whole world tilted sideways like someone had picked up the room and shaken it. She grabbed onto the ropes to keep herself from falling. Diego stepped back and looked at Carlos as if to ask if they should stop. Carlos said nothing. He just watched. Maria took a deep breath. She let go of the ropes. She put her hands back up, and she walked forward. Diego threw another right hand, but this time Maria slipped it. She moved her head just a few inches to the left, and the punch went past her ear. Then she came back with a left hook to Diego's body that made him grunt and bend slightly at the waist. Then she followed with a right hand to his chin that snapped his head back. It was not a knockout punch, but it was clean and hard, and it made Diego's eyes go wide with surprise. For the rest of that round, Diego fought her like she was a real opponent, and not just some girl he was doing a favor for. And when the round was over, Carlos was smiling. Over the next several years, Maria dedicated her entire life to fighting. She finished high school, but barely. Her grades were not good because she spent most of her time and energy at the gym. Her mother did not fully understand what Maria was doing, but she supported her because she could see that the gym had given her daughter something that nothing else had. It had given her purpose. It had given her confidence. It had given her a reason to wake up every morning and push through the hard parts of life. At 18, Maria had her first amateur fight. It was in a small venue in Inglewood. There were maybe 200 people in the audience. Her opponent was a girl from San Diego who was taller and had a longer reach. Maria was nervous before the fight. Her hands were shaking as Carlos wrapped them with tape and gauze. Her stomach was churning. But the moment the bell rang and she stepped to the center of the ring, everything else disappeared. All the noise, all the fear, all the doubt, it all just melted away, and there was nothing left except her and the person standing in front of her. Maria won that fight by unanimous decision. It was not spectacular. She did not knock anyone out, but she controlled the fight from start to finish. She used her footwork to stay out of range and then darted in with quick combinations before her opponent could react. She was smart and disciplined and patient. And when the judges raised her hand at the end, Maria felt something she had never felt before. She felt like she belonged somewhere. Over the next few years, Maria compiled an impressive amateur record. She won 32 fights and lost only 4. She won 2 national amateur championships and competed in international tournaments representing the United States. People in the boxing world started to know her name. They called her La Sombra, which means the shadow, because of the way she moved in the ring. She was there and then she was not there. You would throw a punch and she would be gone. Then she would appear on your other side and hit you before you even knew what happened. When Maria turned 23, she decided to turn professional. This was a big decision, because professional fighting was a different world. The money was different. The attention was different. The danger was different. In amateur boxing, the rounds are shorter and the referees are quicker to stop fights. In professional boxing, you are expected to take punishment and keep going. The fights are longer and the stakes are higher, and the people involved are not always looking out for your best interests. Carlos was hesitant at first. He worried about Maria, not because he doubted her ability, but because the professional boxing world, especially for women, was still a difficult place. Female fighters did not get the same opportunities as men. They did not get the same money. They did not get the same respect. And there were people in the sport who openly said that women had no business being in a boxing ring. Carlos had seen talented female fighters get chewed up and spit out, not because they were not good enough, but because the system was stacked against them. But Maria was determined. She had that look in her eyes that Carlos had learned to recognize over the years. It was the same look she had when she was 14 years old, standing in front of his desk asking to learn how to fight. When Maria made up her mind about something, there was no changing it. So Carlos agreed to be her professional trainer and manager. He would guide her career and protect her from the sharks that circled the boxing business looking for young fighters to exploit. Maria's professional career started well. She won her first 8 fights, 6 of them by knockout. The knockout surprised people, because Maria was not a big puncher by traditional standards. She did not have the kind of one-punch power that some fighters have. But she was incredibly accurate, and she knew exactly where to place her punches for maximum effect. She could hit you on the chin at just the right angle with just the right timing, and your legs would stop working. It was a skill that went beyond just physical power. It was about precision and timing and understanding the human body in a way that most people never think about. By the time Maria was 25, she was ranked in the top 10 in her weight class by all the major boxing organizations. She had a record of 12 wins and no losses, 8 knockouts. She was starting to get attention from bigger promoters and bigger television networks. People were writing articles about her. They called her the future of women's boxing. They said she was going to change the sport. But with the attention came something else. Something darker. There were people who did not want Maria to succeed. There were men in the boxing world who felt threatened by a woman who could fight as well as she could. There were other fighters and promoters who saw her as a threat to their own positions. And there were people on social media who said terrible things about her simply because she was a woman who chose to make her living by fighting. Maria tried not to let it bother her. She focused on her training and her fights and tried to block out everything else. But it was hard. It is always hard when the world seems determined to tear you down. She would lie in bed at night, scrolling through her phone, reading comments from people who had never met her and never would meet her, telling her that she was not a real fighter, that she was just a gimmick, that she would never be taken seriously, that she should go back to the kitchen or find a husband or do anything other than what she was doing. Her mother saw what it was doing to her. One night, she sat Maria down at the kitchen table and held her hands and said something that stuck with Maria for a long time. She said, "The people who talk the loudest are usually the ones who have done the least. Do not measure yourself by their words. Measure yourself by your own actions." Maria cried that night, not because she was weak, but because sometimes even the strongest people need to let the pressure out. Then came the opportunity that would change everything. Maria's promoter called her and said there was a chance to fight for a world title. The champion in her weight class was a fighter named Viktor Kozlov's protege. But the fight was not against the champion. It was against a man named Derek Sullivan. Now this needs some explaining. There had been a growing movement in combat sports to have special exhibition matches where male and female fighters would compete against each other. These were controversial events that generated enormous attention and enormous criticism in equal measure. Some people thought they were groundbreaking. Others thought they were dangerous and irresponsible. Derek Sullivan was a male fighter with a record of 15 wins and 3 losses. He was not a world champion. He was not even ranked in the top 20 in his weight class, but he was known for something other than his fighting ability. He was known for his mouth. Derek Sullivan was what people in the boxing world call a trash talker. He said outrageous things to get attention. He insulted his opponents. He insulted their families. He insulted their countries and their religions and anything else he could think of. He was loud and arrogant, and he had built a following on social media by being the most obnoxious person in the sport. Derek had been calling out female fighters for months. He went on podcasts and television shows and said that no woman on earth could last one round with him. He said women's boxing was a joke. He said the best female fighter in the world would not even be competitive with the worst male fighter. He said these things with a smirk on his face and a look in his eyes that suggested he actually believed every word. When Maria's name came up as a potential opponent, Derek laughed. He literally laughed on camera. He said, "Who is Maria Delgado?" He said, "I have never heard of her." He said she is probably some little girl who thinks she is tough because she beat up a few other little girls. He said he would put her down in 30 seconds and then go out for dinner because the fight would not even be enough of a workout to make him hungry. Maria watched that interview on her phone while sitting in the gym after a training session. Carlos was standing behind her, watching over her shoulder. When the video ended, Maria put her phone down and looked at Carlos. Her face was calm, but Carlos could see something burning in her eyes. It was that fire. That same fire he had seen when she was 14 years old. That same fire he had seen every time someone told her she could not do something. Carlos asked her if she wanted to take the fight. Maria did not answer right away. She sat there for a long time, staring at the heavy bag hanging in front of her. Then she stood up and walked over to the bag and hit it. She hit it once with her left hand. Hard. The bag swung back and the chain holding it to the ceiling groaned. Then she turned to Carlos and said, "Yes." The announcement of the fight sent shockwaves through the sports world. It was going to be held in Las Vegas at one of the big casino arenas. The event was sanctioned as an exhibition match, which meant it would not count on either fighter's professional record. But everyone knew that this fight was about much more than records. It was about respect. It was about proving something. It was about a woman standing up and saying, "I am not afraid of you." The media coverage was intense. Every sports network covered it. Every podcast discussed it. Every social media platform was flooded with opinions and predictions and arguments. Some people supported Maria and said she was brave for taking the fight. Others said she was foolish and that she was going to get seriously hurt. Some people said the fight should not be allowed to happen at all. And in the middle of all this noise, Maria kept training. She trained harder than she had ever trained in her life. She woke up at 4:30 every morning and ran 5 miles in the dark streets of her neighborhood. Then she went to the gym and worked with Carlos for 3 hours. Footwork drills, combination drills, defense drills, sparring rounds with the biggest and strongest partners they could find. In the afternoons, she did strength and conditioning work, weights, plyometrics, core work. In the evening, she studied film of Derek Sullivan's fights, looking for patterns and weaknesses and habits that she could exploit. Carlos brought in special sparring partners, men who were bigger than Maria, men who hit harder than Maria, men who moved the way Derek Sullivan moved. Maria sparred with them round after round, taking their best shots and figuring out how to neutralize their advantages. She learned how to use angles to avoid their power. She learned how to get inside their reach, where their long arms became a disadvantage. She learned how to make big, slow fighters miss and then make them pay for it. The weeks turned into months, and the fight drew closer. Maria lost weight and gained muscle. Her body was in the best shape it had ever been. Her mind was sharp and focused. She barely slept because she was so wired with energy and anticipation. But she was not nervous. She was not afraid. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life, even if she did not know it until now. 3 days before the fight, there was a press conference at the hotel attached to the arena in Las Vegas. This was standard procedure for big fights. Both fighters would sit at a long table in front of dozens of reporters and cameras and answer questions and try to sell tickets. Maria flew to Las Vegas with Carlos and a small team that included a nutritionist and a cut man and a few training partners who had become like family to her. The press conference was chaos. The room was packed with reporters and photographers and fans who had somehow gotten access. There were bright lights and the constant clicking of camera shutters and the low murmur of hundreds of people talking at once. Maria sat on one side of the table in a simple black tracksuit with her hair pulled back in its usual tight ponytail. Derek Sullivan sat on the other side in an expensive suit with a gold watch on his wrist and sunglasses on, even though they were indoors. Derek spoke first. He spoke for almost 10 minutes without being asked a question. He talked about himself, about how great he was, about how many followers he had on social media, about how much money he was going to make from this fight. He barely mentioned Maria at all. When he did mention her, he called her the girl, as if she did not have a name. When it was Maria's turn to speak, she kept it short. She said she was grateful for the opportunity. She said she had trained hard and she was ready. She said she respected the sport and she respected the moment. Then she stopped talking. A reporter asked her if she had a message for Derek. Maria looked across the table at him and said, "I will let my hands do the talking." Derek laughed. He leaned into his microphone and said, "That is cute. Real cute." He said, "Listen, sweetheart, this is not a movie. This is real life. And in real life, I am going to eat you alive." The room buzzed with excitement. Cameras flashed. People shouted questions. Derek stood up and pointed at Maria and said, "You have no idea what you have gotten yourself into, little girl. You think you can touch me. You actually think you can touch me." He laughed again and shook his head as if the whole thing was the funniest joke he had ever heard. Maria did not react. She sat perfectly still in her chair with her hands folded on the table in front of her. She looked at Derek with those brown, golden eyes, and she said nothing. Carlos, who was standing behind her, put his hand on her shoulder, not to hold her back, just to let her know he was there, that he believed in her, that she was not alone. The press conference ended with the traditional face-off, where both fighters stand inches apart and stare at each other while the cameras capture the moment. Derek towered over Maria. He was 6'1" tall and weighed 165 pounds. He looked down at her with that smirk that never seemed to leave his face. He leaned in close and whispered something that the microphones did not pick up but that Maria heard clearly. He said, "You are going to embarrass yourself." Maria looked up at him and, for the first time, she smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible. But it was there, and it said everything that words could not. That night, Maria went back to her hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed looking out the window at the lights of Las Vegas. The city glowed like something out of a dream. All those lights and all those people and all that noise. And in the middle of it all was a small woman from East Los Angeles who had learned to fight in a rundown gym with cracked mirrors and peeling tape. She thought about her mother. She thought about Carlos. She thought about all the years of hard work and sacrifice and pain that had brought her to this moment. And she thought about Derek Sullivan and his smirk and his words and his absolute certainty that she was nothing. Maria closed the curtains and lay down on the bed. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she slept peacefully. Because she knew something that Derek Sullivan did not know. She knew that the most dangerous fighter in the world is not the biggest or the strongest or the loudest. The most dangerous fighter in the world is the one who has nothing to lose and everything to prove. The morning of the fight arrived like any other morning in Las Vegas. The sun came up over the desert and burned away the cool night air until the heat pressed against the windows of every building on the strip. Inside the hotel, Maria opened her eyes at exactly 4:30 without an alarm. Her body had been waking at this time for so many years that it no longer needed to be told. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling and listening to the hum of the air conditioning unit beneath the window. Then she swung her legs over the side of the bed and placed her bare feet on the carpet and felt the stillness of the room. She did not feel nervous. That surprised her. She had expected to wake up with her heart racing and her stomach tight and her hands trembling the way they sometimes did before a fight, but there was none of that. Instead, there was a deep calm that settled over her like a blanket. It was as if her body already knew what was going to happen and had made peace with it. Maria went through her morning routine the same way she did every fight day. She stretched on the floor for 20 minutes, working out the tightness in her hips and shoulders and hamstrings. She drank a full glass of water slowly. She ate a small meal of oatmeal with bananas and a little honey. Nothing too heavy, nothing that would sit in her stomach and slow her down. Then she showered and dressed in a plain white t-shirt and black sweatpants and sat in the chair by the window to wait. Carlos knocked on her door at 7:30. He came in carrying 2 cups of coffee, even though Maria did not drink coffee on fight days. The second cup was for himself. He sat down across from her and they talked about small things, the weather, a restaurant they had passed on the way from the airport, a funny story about one of their sparring partners who had gotten lost in the hotel the night before and ended up in the kitchen asking the chefs for directions back to his room. They did not talk about the fight. They did not need to. Everything that needed to be said about the fight had been said in the gym over months of preparation. Now it was just about waiting. The fight was scheduled for 9 o'clock that evening. That gave Maria the entire day to fill. Some fighters like to stay busy on fight day. They would go for walks or watch movies or play cards. Maria preferred silence. She liked to be alone with her thoughts. She liked to visualize the fight in her mind, playing it out over and over like a movie she was directing. She would see herself moving, slipping punches, throwing combinations. She would feel the leather of the gloves on her hands and hear the sound they made when they connected with something solid. She would imagine every possible scenario and plan her response to each one. In the early afternoon, there was a brief meeting with the event organizers. They went over the rules of the exhibition. It would be 5 rounds of 3 minutes each. Both fighters would wear 10-ounce gloves. There would be a referee in the ring and 2 judges at ringside, although since it was an exhibition, there would be no official scoring. The fight would be stopped if the referee determined that either fighter was unable to continue or was taking excessive punishment. Both fighters had to agree to these terms in writing. Maria signed the papers without reading them because Carlos had already reviewed everything and told her it was standard. Derek Sullivan was supposed to be at this meeting too, but he did not show up. His manager came instead, a short, heavy man in a wrinkled suit who smelled like cigars, and explained that Derek was resting and did not want to be disturbed. Carlos looked at Maria and raised his eyebrows slightly. Maria said nothing. As the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere in the hotel began to change. You could feel the energy building. More and more people were arriving for the event. The lobby was crowded with fight fans wearing t-shirts and hats with various fighter logos. There were celebrities and athletes and business people and media personalities all moving through the building with that particular buzz that only happens before a big fight. Everyone seemed to be talking about the same thing. Could she do it? Could a woman really compete with a man in the ring? What was going to happen when that bell rang? At 5 o'clock, Maria began her preparation. She went to the arena with Carlos and her team through a back entrance to avoid the crowds. The arena was still mostly empty at that point. The seats stretched out in every direction like a massive bowl. The ring sat in the center under a constellation of bright lights. Workers were still setting up cameras and running cables and testing the sound system. There was a low bass vibration coming from somewhere that Maria could feel in her chest. They went to the dressing room that had been assigned to her. It was a small concrete room with fluorescent lights and a folding table and a few metal chairs. There was a mirror on one wall and a bathroom in the back. It was not glamorous, but Maria did not need glamorous. She needed quiet and space and time to prepare. Carlos began the process of wrapping her hands. This was a ritual that they had performed hundreds of times. He laid out the gauze and tape on the table and took Maria's left hand first. He wrapped the gauze around her wrist several times to stabilize the joint. Then he brought it across her palm and between each finger, creating a lattice of protection over the small, delicate bones of her hand. He wrapped the knuckles several times, making a pad that would cushion the impact of each punch. Then he secured everything with tape, pulling it tight but not so tight that it restricted blood flow. He repeated the process on her right hand. The whole thing took about 15 minutes and neither of them spoke during it. When the wrapping was done, Maria put on her hand wraps and began shadowboxing in the dressing room. She moved slowly at first, just warming up her muscles and finding her rhythm. She threw jabs at the air, watching her reflection in the mirror. She worked combinations. Jab, jab, cross. Jab, cross, hook. Double jab, cross, hook, cross. Her feet shuffled on the concrete floor, making a soft scraping sound that was almost musical. Gradually, she increased her speed until her hands were just blurs and her body was moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost impossible for something made of bone and muscle and skin. Carlos watched her and felt a swell of emotion that he kept carefully hidden behind his weathered face. He had trained dozens of fighters over the years. Some of them had gone on to win titles and make millions of dollars. Some of them had failed and disappeared from the sport without a trace, but none of them moved the way Maria moved. None of them had what she had, that combination of speed and intelligence and will that turned fighting from a physical act into something closer to art. At 7:30, an official from the Athletic Commission came to inspect Maria's hand wraps. This was required by the rules. The official was a middle-aged woman with short gray hair and a clipboard. She examined each wrap carefully, pressing on the knuckles and checking the tape. She signed off on them and wished Maria good luck. Then she left. At 8 o'clock, the arena began to fill. Maria could hear the crowd even through the concrete walls of the dressing room. It started as a low hum and gradually grew into a roar. 12,000 people were taking their seats. 12,000 people had paid hundreds and, in some cases, thousands of dollars to watch what was about to happen. The energy was like a living thing. It pulsed and surged, and you could feel it in your bones. Maria put on her fighting gear. Black shorts with a thin gold stripe down each side, a black sports bra, black boxing shoes that Carlos had bought for her as a gift. They were the most expensive shoes she had ever owned. She laced them up tight and bounced on her toes a few times to make sure they felt right. Then she put on her robe. It was plain black with nothing written on it. No sponsors, no logos, no flashy designs. Just black. Carlos gathered the team together and they formed a small circle in the dressing room. There was the cutman named Hector, who had been with them for 3 years. There were 2 cornermen who would be responsible for giving Maria water and applying Vaseline between rounds. And there was a young woman named Sophia who was Maria's nutritionist and who had become one of her closest friends. They all put their hands together in the center of the circle, and Carlos said a few words. He said this was the moment they had all worked for. He said he was proud of every single person in that room. He said tonight was not just about winning a fight. It was about showing the world something it needed to see. Then he looked at Maria and said, "Go out there and be who you are." The walk from the dressing room to the ring was the longest walk of Maria's life. The corridor was narrow and lined with security guards and event staff. She could hear the crowd getting louder with every step. Music was playing over the arena speakers, something loud and dramatic with heavy bass. Then she reached the entrance to the arena floor, and the curtain was pulled aside and the lights hit her. The roar of 12,000 people washed over her like a wave. It was so loud that she could not hear her own thoughts. She walked forward, surrounded by her team. Carlos was directly behind her with his hand on her shoulder. The aisle leading to the ring was lined with fans reaching out, trying to touch her, trying to get her attention. Camera flashes went off like tiny explosions of light. Television cameras tracked her every step. Maria climbed the steps to the ring and slipped through the ropes. The canvas felt familiar under her feet. She had stood on 100 ring canvases in her career. She walked to her corner and Carlos removed her robe. She bounced on her toes and threw a few light punches to stay warm. Then she waited. Derek Sullivan's entrance was the opposite of Maria's in every way. Where Maria had been quiet and understated, Derek was loud and theatrical. His music was some kind of aggressive rap song with lyrics that Maria could not make out over the crowd noise. He came through the curtain wearing a gold robe that sparkled under the lights. He had an entourage of at least 10 people around him. He was shadowboxing as he walked, throwing wild punches and mugging for the cameras. He stopped several times to pose for photographs and flex for the audience. The whole walk to the ring took him almost 5 minutes. When Derek climbed into the ring, he immediately went to the center and spread his arms wide as if he was embracing the crowd. He turned in a slow circle, soaking in the attention. The crowd was split. About half of them were booing and the other half were cheering. Derek did not seem to care which was which. He fed off all of it. Every sound was fuel for his ego. The referee called both fighters to the center of the ring. He was an experienced official named James Patterson, who had refereed world championship fights. He was chosen specifically for this event because of his experience and his reputation for keeping fighters safe. Patterson looked at both fighters and went over the rules. He told them he expected a clean fight. He told them that if he said stop, they needed to stop immediately. He told them he would not hesitate to end the fight if he felt either fighter was in danger. During the referee's instructions, Derek stared at Maria with that same smirk he always wore. He was bouncing on his toes and rolling his shoulders and doing everything he could to appear relaxed and confident. Maria stood still. She did not bounce. She did not move. She just looked at Derek with those calm brown-golden eyes and waited. The referee asked them to touch gloves. Maria extended her gloves toward Derek. He looked at her gloves and then looked at her face, and then he turned and walked back to his corner without touching them. The crowd reacted with a mix of boos and cheers. Maria lowered her gloves and walked back to her own corner. Carlos was standing on the ring apron, leaning through the ropes. He looked at Maria and said, "Remember what we practiced. Stay patient. Let him come to you. Make him miss. Make him pay." Maria put in her mouthpiece and raised her hands. She took one long, slow breath and let it out through her nose. The arena lights were hot on her skin. The noise of the crowd was deafening. But inside her head there was silence. Perfect, absolute silence. It was the silence she had learned to find in the gym during all those years of training. The silence that came when every distraction fell away and there was nothing left but the fight. The bell rang. Derek came out fast. He crossed the ring in 3 big strides and threw a jab that was aimed at Maria's head. It was a quick punch thrown with bad intentions. If it had landed, it would have rocked her. But Maria saw it coming from the moment his shoulder twitched. She slipped to her left, and the punch sailed past her right ear. She felt the wind from it on her skin. Derek threw another jab, and then a hard right cross. Maria moved her head to avoid the jab and then stepped to her right to avoid the cross. Derek's fist cut through the air where her chin had been a fraction of a second earlier. He was throwing hard, harder than most fighters threw in the opening seconds of a fight. He was trying to make a statement. He was trying to end this quickly. Maria did not throw a punch in the first 30 seconds. She moved. She circled. She used footwork that would have made a dancer envious. Every time Derek threw a punch, she was not there. She was always just slightly out of range or at just the wrong angle for him to connect. It was like trying to hit smoke. Derek was getting frustrated. Maria could see it in his face. The smirk was starting to fade. It was being replaced by something else. Confusion, maybe, or the first tiny spark of doubt. About a minute into the round, Maria threw her first punch. It was a jab. Quick and sharp, it caught Derek right on the nose. It was not a hard punch. It was not meant to hurt him. It was meant to send a message. I am here. I can reach you. You are not untouchable. Derek's head snapped back slightly and his eyes widened. He had not expected her to be that fast. He had not expected her to be able to close the distance so quickly and so cleanly. He reset his stance and came forward again, throwing a combination of hooks and uppercuts. Maria blocked some and slipped others and moved away from the rest. She made it look easy, even though it was not easy at all. Every movement was the result of years of practice and preparation. Every slip and every step had been drilled into her body 10,000 times until it became instinct. Near the end of the first round, Maria caught Derek with a clean left hook to the body. She stepped inside his jab and turned her hips and drove her fist into his ribs, just below his right arm. The punch made a sound like someone dropping a heavy book on a table. Derek grunted and his body contracted involuntarily. He stepped back and put his hands on his hips for just a second before catching himself and getting back into his stance. But that second was enough. Maria had hurt him. Not badly. Not enough to stop the fight. But she had hurt him, and everyone in the arena knew it. The bell rang to end the first round, and both fighters went back to their corners. Carlos was waiting for Maria with water and a towel. He spoke quickly and calmly. He said, "You are doing perfectly." He said, "Keep moving. Keep making him miss." He said his body is open every time he throws the right hand because he drops his left elbow. Target that. Maria nodded and spit her water into a bucket and put her mouthpiece back in. In the other corner, Derek was talking to his trainer. From where Maria sat, she could not hear what they were saying, but she could see the expression on Derek's face. He was not smirking anymore. He looked serious. Maybe for the first time since this whole thing started, he looked like he was taking this seriously. The second round began and Derek changed his approach. Instead of charging forward, he started to use his jab more. He was trying to keep Maria at distance where his longer reach would be an advantage. It was a smart adjustment. His jab was fast and long, and it was harder for Maria to slip than his bigger punches had been. She took a few jabs on her guard, and one caught her on the forehead and pushed her back a step. But Maria adapted too. She started using more lateral movement. Instead of moving straight back, when Derek jabbed, she circled to her left, which took her away from his power hand. She would circle and then suddenly change direction and come back to her right, catching Derek off balance. Every time he tried to set his feet, she moved again. She was making him work, making him chase, making him burn energy. Halfway through the second round, Maria found her opening. Derek threw his jab and then loaded up his right hand for a big cross. It was a powerful punch that would have done serious damage if it landed. But he telegraphed it. His right shoulder dipped slightly before the punch came. Maria had seen this in the film she studied, and she was waiting for it. She pulled her head back just enough to let the punch miss. Then, before Derek could recover, she stepped to her left and threw a three-punch combination. A jab to the face, a right cross to the chin, and a left hook to the body. All three punches landed clean. The crowd erupted. 12,000 people jumped to their feet. The sound was incredible. It was like standing inside a thunderstorm. Derek stumbled backward and his legs looked unsteady for a moment. His eyes were slightly glazed. Maria could see that the right cross had hurt him. She could have rushed forward and thrown more punches while he was hurt. A lot of fighters would have, but Carlos had always taught her patience. Hurt fighters are dangerous fighters because they become desperate, and desperate people throw reckless punches that can end a fight in an instant. So Maria stayed composed. She kept her distance, and let Derek recover enough to continue while maintaining her position and her rhythm. The third round was where things started to shift in a way that even the most experienced fight observers had not expected. Derek came out with renewed aggression. He had been embarrassed in the first 2 rounds, and his pride was demanding that he do something about it. He threw bombs, big looping hooks and uppercuts that carried all of his 165 pounds behind them. Any one of those punches could have knocked Maria out cold if it landed on the right spot. But Maria was in a zone that fighters sometimes describe as being in the flow. Everything slowed down. She could see Derek's punches coming before they were thrown. She could read the tiny shifts in his weight and the small movements of his eyes and shoulders that told her what was coming next. She was not just reacting anymore. She was anticipating. She was 2 steps ahead. Derek threw a wild left hook that was aimed at Maria's temple. She ducked under it and came up on the other side and drove a right uppercut into Derek's chin. His head snapped back and his mouthpiece flew out of his mouth and landed on the canvas. The referee stopped the action to let Derek put his mouthpiece back in. During the pause, Derek leaned against the ropes and took deep breaths. Sweat was pouring down his face and his chest was heaving. He was tired. Maria could see it. She could see the way his shoulders were starting to sag and the way his hands were dropping lower between punches. He was fading. When the action resumed, Maria went to work. She threw combinations with a speed and precision that had the crowd on their feet for the rest of the round. Jab, jab, cross. Step to the left. Jab, hook to the body. Circle right. Double jab, right uppercut. Each combination was different. Each one came from a different angle. Derek could not predict what was coming next because Maria never repeated the same pattern twice. By the end of the 3rd round, Derek's face was red and swollen. There was a cut over his left eye that was bleeding. His trainer worked on it between rounds, pressing a small metal device against the cut to slow the bleeding. Maria sat in her corner, breathing evenly while Carlos talked to her. He said 3 more minutes. Stay smart. Do not get careless now, he said. The body shots are working. Keep going there. His ribs are hurting. Maria nodded. She could feel it. She could feel the momentum of the fight carrying her forward like a current in a river. Everything was flowing. Everything was clicking. The 4th round would be the one that everyone would remember. The 4th round started and the arena was electric. Every single person in that building was standing. Nobody was sitting down. Nobody was looking at their phone. Nobody was talking to the person next to them about anything other than what was happening inside that ring. The noise was constant and enormous, like being trapped inside the engine of a jet plane. Maria could feel the vibrations of 12,000 voices in her ribcage. Derek Sullivan came out of his corner with a different look in his eyes. The arrogance was gone. The showmanship was gone. The gold robe and the smirking and the posing for cameras, all of that had been stripped away over 3 rounds, and what was left was a man who was in trouble, and who knew he was in trouble. But to his credit, he did not quit. He came forward with his hands higher than they had been in the previous rounds, and he tried to establish his jab. Again, Maria was patient. She let him jab, she blocked some and slipped others, and occasionally she let one land clean on her guard just to give Derek the illusion that he was doing something effective. It was a trick Carlos had taught her years ago. Sometimes you let your opponent feel like they are winning for a few seconds because it makes them open up, and when they open up, you find the holes you need. About 45 seconds into the round, Derek threw a right cross that missed and left him off balance. His right foot was too far forward and his weight was committed to the punch with nothing left to anchor him. Maria saw the opening instantly. She stepped to her left and threw a short, compact left hook that landed flush on Derek's jaw. It was not a big, dramatic punch. It was not a haymaker that you could see from the back row. It was a short, tight, precise punch that traveled no more than 8 inches, but it landed perfectly. Right on the button, as fighters say. Right on the spot where the jaw meets the skull, and where the impact sends a shockwave through the brain that shuts everything down like someone pulling the plug on a machine. Derek's legs buckled. His eyes rolled upward, and for a moment he looked like a man who had just been woken from a deep sleep and did not know where he was. He staggered sideways, and his left hand grabbed for the top rope, but missed. His knees hit the canvas first, and then his gloves touched down, and he was on all fours in the center of the ring. The crowd exploded. The noise was beyond anything Maria had ever heard. It was not just cheering. It was something primal, something that came from deep inside 12,000 people who had just witnessed something they would never forget. The referee, James Patterson, stepped between Maria and Derek and began the count. Maria walked to the neutral corner the way she had been taught. She placed her gloves on the top rope and watched. She did not celebrate. She did not raise her arms. She did not taunt. She just watched and waited. Patterson counted to 4, and Derek got 1 foot under him. He pushed himself up using the rope for support. By the count of 7, he was standing. Patterson looked into his eyes and asked him if he was okay. Derek nodded and said yes. Patterson wiped Derek's gloves on his own shirt, which is a standard procedure after a knockdown, and then he waved both fighters together to continue. Derek moved forward, but he was not the same fighter. The knockdown had taken something from him, not just physically, but mentally. There is a moment in every fighter's career when they realize that they are not invincible, that they can be hurt, that they can be put down. For Derek Sullivan, that moment had just arrived, and it had arrived on national television in front of 12,000 people and millions more watching from home. The man who had laughed at the idea of fighting a woman. The man who had said he would end this in 30 seconds. That man was now wobbling on unsteady legs with a cut over his eye and a bruise forming on his jaw. Maria did not rush. She did not try to jump on Derek and finish him immediately, the way so many fighters do after scoring a knockdown. She knew that hurt fighters sometimes find a second wind. She knew that desperation could make a person dangerous. So she reset her position. She got back to her distance. She started moving again, circling, jabbing, staying just out of reach. Derek tried to fire back. He threw a combination that had some pop on it. His right hand was still heavy, even though his legs were compromised. One of his jabs caught Maria on the cheek, and she felt the sting of it. It was a reminder that this was not over yet. She nodded slightly as if to acknowledge the punch, and then she went back to work. The last minute of the 4th round was a masterclass. Maria threw 23 punches and landed 17 of them. She hit Derek to the body and the head. She mixed up her punches using jabs and crosses and hooks and uppercuts, in combinations that flowed together like water. She moved in and out of range with footwork that made it impossible for Derek to set himself and throw back effectively. Every time he planted his feet to throw, she was already gone and hitting him from a different angle. When the bell rang to end the 4th round, Derek walked back to his corner on legs that looked like they were made of rubber. His trainer was talking to him urgently. The cut man was working on the cut over his eye, which had opened up again and was bleeding more than before. In the other corner, Maria sat calmly on her stool while Carlos gave her water and wiped her face with a towel. She was barely breathing hard. She looked like she could go another 10 rounds. Carlos leaned in close and spoke into Maria's ear so nobody else could hear. He said, "You have already won this fight. The whole world can see it. He said this last round is for you. Just go out there and enjoy it. You have earned this." Maria looked at Carlos, and for the first time that night she smiled. It was the same small smile she had given Derek at the press conference, the one that said everything without saying anything at all. Before the 5th round began, something remarkable happened. Derek Sullivan stood up from his stool, and instead of waiting for the bell, he walked to the center of the ring. For a moment, everyone thought he was going to say something, some kind of trash talk or insult or defiant gesture, but instead he extended his gloves toward Maria. He was offering to touch gloves, the same gesture he had refused before the fight. Maria stood up and walked to the center of the ring. She touched her gloves to his. The crowd cheered. It was not the loudest cheer of the night, but it might have been the most meaningful. Something had shifted between these two fighters, something that went beyond the punches and the pain. The 5th and final round began. Maria fought it differently than she had fought the previous 4 rounds. She was more aggressive, more willing to exchange punches at close range. She was not reckless about it. She still used her head movement and her footwork, but she stood in front of Derek and traded with him in a way that showed the world she was not afraid. She wanted people to see that she could take his best shots and keep coming forward. And she did. Derek landed some good punches in that final round. A right cross that snapped Maria's head to the side. A body shot that made her wince. An uppercut that caught her on the chin, and for just a second made the lights in the arena look like they were flickering. But Maria absorbed everything he threw and came back with more. She was relentless. She was a machine. A beautiful, terrible machine that could not be stopped. With about 30 seconds left in the round, Maria caught Derek with a combination that was so fast and so precise that the people watching in slow-motion replays afterward could barely follow it. A jab to draw his guard up, a right cross to the body that made him lower his hands, and then a left hook to the chin that landed with a crack that you could hear even over the noise of the crowd. Derek went down again. This time it was different. This time he did not get to all fours. He landed flat on his back with his arms spread out to his sides. His eyes were open, but they were looking at nothing. The ceiling, the lights. Whatever it is that a person sees when the world goes temporarily dark. The referee counted. He counted slowly and deliberately. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The arena was so loud that Patterson could barely hear his own voice. 6, 7. Derek rolled to his side. 8. He got a hand on the canvas. 9. He pushed himself up to one knee, but his body would not cooperate. His legs would not lock. His balance was gone. He reached for the rope, but it was too far away. And then Patterson reached 10 and waved his arms. It was over. The arena erupted in a way that made everything that had come before seem quiet by comparison. The sound hit Maria like a physical force. She felt it in her chest and her stomach and her legs. People were screaming and jumping and hugging strangers. The ring was suddenly full of people. Carlos was there wrapping his arms around her and lifting her off the ground, even though he was an old man who probably should not have been lifting anyone. Hector and the cornermen were there. Sophia was there with tears streaming down her face. Camera crews pushed through the crowd trying to get close to Maria. Maria stood in the center of the ring and looked out at the crowd and the lights and the chaos, and she felt something break open inside her chest. It was not pain. It was something else entirely. It was every moment of doubt she had ever experienced, every insult she had ever received, every time someone told her she could not do something, or that she was not good enough, or that she did not belong. All of that broke apart and fell away, and what was left was a feeling of pure, overwhelming vindication. Then something happened that nobody expected. Maria walked across the ring to where Derek Sullivan was sitting on his stool. His trainer was wiping blood from his face and holding an ice pack against the swelling on his jaw. Derek looked up when he saw Maria approaching. For a moment, there was something in his eyes that might have been fear or shame or both. But Maria did not come to gloat. She did not come to mock him the way he had mocked her for months. She extended her hand. Derek looked at her hand and then looked at her face. Then he took it. He took her hand and she pulled him to his feet, and they stood there in the center of the ring holding hands, and the crowd went absolutely insane. It was the image that would appear on the front page of every newspaper and every sports website in the world the next morning. The small woman from East Los Angeles and the man who had sworn she could never touch him, standing together with their hands clasped, while 12,000 people roared around them. The post-fight interview was conducted in the ring by a television reporter who could barely contain his own excitement. He asked Maria how she felt. She said she felt grateful. He asked her what she wanted to say to all the people who had doubted her. She said she did not have anything to say to them because she had never been fighting against the doubters. She had always been fighting for herself and for every person who had ever been told they were not enough. The reporter asked her about the knockdowns. Maria said Derek was a tough fighter and that she respected him for getting up after the first one and for trying to get up after the second one. The reporter asked her what she thought about the fact that she had just knocked out a man who outweighed her by 33 pounds. Maria paused, and then she said something that became one of the most replayed quotes in sports history. She said, "Size does not determine strength. Heart determines strength. And I have a very big heart." Then the reporter turned to Derek Sullivan. Derek was standing a few feet away with his trainer, and he looked like a man who had just been through a car accident. His face was swollen and discolored. The cut over his eye had been closed with butterfly bandages. He moved slowly and carefully, like every step required concentration. The reporter asked Derek what happened. Derek took a long time to answer. The arena was quieter now. People were still buzzing, but they had settled down enough that you could hear individual voices. Derek looked at Maria, and then he looked at the camera, and he said something that nobody in that building expected to hear from the man who had spent months mocking and belittling his opponent. He said, "I was wrong." He said, "I underestimated her." He said, "She is the best fighter I have ever been in the ring with, and I am not ashamed to admit that." He said, "I talked a lot of trash and she backed up everything with her fists, and I respect that more than anything." The arena cheered again. Not the wild, uncontrollable cheering from before, but something warmer. Something that sounded like respect. Maria nodded at Derek, and for the second time that night, they touched gloves. The aftermath of the fight was enormous. It was not just a sports story. It became a cultural moment. Within hours, clips from the fight had been viewed hundreds of millions of times on social media. Maria's name was trending in every country on Earth. News outlets that had never covered boxing were running stories about her. Talk shows were calling, magazine covers were being planned, endorsement deals were being offered. But Maria did not pay attention to any of that immediately. After the fight, she went back to her hotel room and called her mother. The phone rang twice, and then her mother answered, and Maria could hear from the sound of her voice that she had been watching. Her mother was crying, not sad tears, proud tears, the kind of tears that come when you watch someone you love accomplish something that once seemed impossible. Maria sat on the edge of the hotel bed with the phone pressed to her ear and listened to her mother cry, and she cried too. They did not say much. They did not need to. Some moments are bigger than words. The next morning, Maria woke up to a world that was different from the one she had gone to sleep in. Her phone had so many notifications that it had stopped counting them. Her social media following had gone from a few 100,000 to several million overnight. There were messages from athletes and actors and musicians and politicians and people she had never met and would never meet, all saying the same thing. "You inspired me." Carlos called her at 8 in the morning and told her that they had received more than 24 interview requests and that 3 different television networks wanted to do documentary specials about her life. A major sneaker company wanted to give her a signature shoe deal. A publisher wanted her to write a book. Maria listened to all of this, and then she told Carlos she needed a few days before she dealt with any of it. She wanted to go home. She wanted to see her mother. She wanted to go back to the gym and hit the heavy bag and feel the quiet rhythm of training that had been the foundation of her entire life. Maria flew back to Los Angeles the following day. When she arrived at the airport, there was a small crowd of people waiting for her. Not the organized crowd that celebrities attract, but just regular people who had seen the fight and wanted to tell her in person that they were proud of her. There were young girls holding handmade signs with her name on them. There were older women who reminded Maria of her mother standing there with tears in their eyes. There was even a man who introduced himself as a retired boxer who said he had watched the fight 3 times already and that it was the most beautiful display of the sweet science he had ever seen. Maria thanked every single person, she shook their hands and took photographs with them and signed whatever they put in front of her. She spent almost an hour at that airport, greeting strangers who had become fans, and she did not rush through any of it because she understood something that a lot of people in her position might not have understood. These people were not there because she had won a fight. They were there because she had shown them something about what was possible, about what a person could achieve when they refused to accept the limitations that others tried to place on them. When Maria finally made it home to her mother's house in East Los Angeles, her mother was waiting at the front door. They hugged for a long time without saying anything. Then they went inside and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where her mother had held her hands and told her not to measure herself by other people's words. Her mother made coffee and they drank it slowly and talked about small things. The neighbor's dog that would not stop barking. The leaky faucet in the bathroom that needed fixing. Normal things. Ordinary things. The kind of things that remind you that no matter how much the world outside might change, the important things stay the same. 3 days after the fight, Maria went back to the gym. Ramos Boxing looked exactly the same as it always did. The old rubber smell. The buzzing lights. The cracked mirror. The peeling tape. Nothing had changed. Carlos was there sitting behind his small wooden desk reading a newspaper just like the very first time Maria had walked through that door 12 years ago. He looked up at her over his reading glasses and said, "Welcome back." She said, "It is good to be back." Maria wrapped her own hands that morning. She did not need Carlos to do it. She had learned how years ago. But she liked the ritual of it. The careful wrapping of gauze, the threading between the fingers, the layers over the knuckles. It was meditative. It was calming. It connected her to every training session she had ever done and every fight she had ever fought and every moment that had led to who she was now. She walked over to the heavy bag and stood in front of it. She put her hands up. She took a breath. And she started hitting. In the weeks that followed the fight, Maria's life changed in ways that she could not have predicted. She became one of the most famous athletes in the world. She appeared on magazine covers and television shows and billboards. She signed endorsement deals worth millions of dollars. She was invited to the White House. She spoke at conferences and schools and events all over the country. She used her platform to advocate for equal pay in women's sports and for more funding for youth boxing programs in underserved communities. But through all of it, Maria stayed grounded. She continued to train at Ramos Boxing every day. She continued to live in her mother's neighborhood in East Los Angeles, even though she could have afforded to live anywhere. She continued to show up early and work hard and treat every person she met with the same respect, regardless of who they were or what they could do for her. Carlos watched all of this from his small wooden desk. He watched the television interviews and the magazine spreads and the parade of important people who came to the gym to meet Maria. And sometimes, late in the evening, when everyone else had gone home and it was just the two of them in the gym, Carlos would look at Maria and remember the skinny 14-year-old girl who had stood in front of him and said she wanted to learn how to fight. He would remember what he had said to her. "You do not look like a fighter." And he would remember what she had said back to him. "That is why I need to become one." One evening, about 2 months after the fight, Maria was at the gym training alone. It was late and the sun had gone down, and the only light was coming from the fluorescent tubes above the ring. She was hitting the heavy bag, working on a combination that Carlos had shown her that morning. Jab crossed hook to the body, roll hook to the head. She was so focused on the rhythm of the combination that she did not hear the door open behind her. A young girl walked in. She was maybe 13 or 14 years old. She was small and thin with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had brown eyes that looked almost golden in the light. She stood just inside the door and watched Maria hit the bag without saying anything. After a few minutes, Maria noticed her. She stopped punching and turned around and looked at the girl. The girl said she had seen the fight on television. She said she had watched it 12 times. She said she wanted to learn how to fight. Maria looked at her for a long moment. She saw something in the girl's eyes. Something familiar. Something burning. Something that could not be extinguished by doubt or fear or the cruelty of a world that did not always make room for people like them. Maria took off her gloves and walked over to the girl. She said, "What is your name?" The girl said, "My name is Lucia." Maria smiled and said, "Follow me, Lucia." She walked the girl over to the center of the gym and stood in front of her. She said, "The first thing you need to learn is how to stand." She showed Lucia the basic fighting stance. Feet shoulder-width apart, lead foot pointed forward, back foot at a slight angle, knees slightly bent, hands up by the face, chin down. Lucia copied the stance carefully. She was awkward at first, the way everyone is the first time. But she kept trying, and Maria kept correcting her and encouraging her. After a few minutes, Lucia was holding the stance with a stability that belied her age and inexperience. Maria nodded and said, "Good. Now the second thing you need to learn is the most important thing of all." Lucia looked at her with wide eyes, waiting. Maria said, "You need to learn how to breathe." Outside the gym, the streets of East Los Angeles were dark and quiet. The sound of traffic hummed in the distance. Somewhere a dog was barking. The world was going on, the way the world always goes on. Indifferent and relentless, and full of people who would tell you what you could not do and what you should not try, and who you were not allowed to become. But inside the gym, two fighters were learning to breathe. One who had already proven the world wrong, and one who was just beginning her journey toward doing the same thing. And the heavy bag swung gently in the air, pushed by the breeze from the open door. And the lights buzzed overhead, and the mirror on the far wall reflected two figures standing side by side in the fighting stance. The woman who had been mocked, and who had answered with her fists, and the girl who would carry that answer forward into whatever came next. Maria Delgado went on to fight professionally for another 6 years. She won 2 world titles in her weight class and defended them a combined 9 times. She finished her career with a record of 28 wins and 1 loss with 19 knockouts. The one loss came on a split decision in a fight that many observers thought she had won. She retired at the age of 32 and transitioned into training the next generation of fighters at Ramos Boxing, which she purchased from Carlos when he finally decided to retire at the age of 81. Carlos lived for another 4 years after that. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, and Maria was the one who delivered the eulogy at his funeral. She said, "Carlos Ramos did not just teach me how to fight. He taught me that the size of your body does not matter nearly as much as the size of your belief in yourself." The fight against Derek Sullivan remains one of the most watched and most discussed events in combat sports history. It has been analyzed and debated and celebrated countless times. Some people still argue about whether it should have happened at all. Some people say it proved something important about equality and human potential. Some people say it was just a fight between two people and that people read too much into it. But for Maria, it was never about proving anything to the world. It was about proving something to herself. It was about a little girl from East Los Angeles who lost her father at 6 years old and who learned that the only person you can truly count on is yourself. It was about a woman who walked into a gym and said she wanted to learn how to fight because the world was not going to be gentle with her, and she refused to be gentle with it either. Derek Sullivan continued his career after the fight. He won some and lost some. He never reached the top of his sport, but he earned a decent living and he supported his family. He and Maria developed an unlikely friendship in the years after their fight. They appeared at events together and did charity work together, and occasionally they would joke about that night in Las Vegas. Derek would say, "You hit harder than anyone I ever fought." And Maria would say, "You talked more than anyone I ever fought." And they would both laugh. But the moment that mattered most, the moment that people remember, the moment that was frozen in time and printed on posters and shared millions of times on every platform imaginable, that moment was simple. It was a man looking down at a woman and saying, "You think you can touch me," and then seconds later being put down by the very person he had mocked. It was a story as old as time, the story of the underestimated, the overlooked, the dismissed, finding the strength within themselves to rise up and show the world exactly who they are. And somewhere in East Los Angeles, in a gym that smells like old rubber and sweat, a young girl named Lucia is learning how to breathe. And one day, when she is ready, she will learn how to fight. And one day after that, she will stand in a ring somewhere with 12,000 people watching, and she will remember the woman who taught her, the woman who was mocked, the woman who was doubted, the woman who answered with her fists and her heart and her unbreakable will, the woman who put him down.